My project was looking at pilot monitoring of methane emissions in farm dams in Western Australia. The project came out of a question at a field day, so I was in Manjinup and someone asked me how all the research from over in the eastern states translated into Western Australia. Surprisingly, there's 200,000 farm dams in Western Australia, but there hadn't been any methane emissions monitoring on any of those dams. Some of the emissions research in the eastern states from Victoria and New South Wales shows that farm dams can either be a source of emissions or a sink of emissions, depending on the surrounding vegetation and land use. So we wanted to know what that looked like in Western Australia. If we don't monitor it and we don't understand what our current water quality emissions are, then we can't put in management suggestions. So there's a lot more work to do in measuring a lot more dams, but to build a climate resilient state, we're going to need to understand what our current dams look like and then where we're heading to manage them. We've used 2 dams that were already had a lot of instrumentation as part of another project. We picked 2 dams from a suite of 12. One of them had fringing vegetation because some of the research in Eastern Australia has shown that when you've got lots of fringing vegetation that cleans up your water on the way in, you might have better water quality and less emissions. And then we also tried to pick a real typical wheat belt farm dam. So we picked one of the sites that was on a sand plain, heavily stocked with sheep, to try and look at what happens when you've got lots of livestock manure and other things washing into the dam. The transformational grant allowed us to start to understand how to measure these things in Western Australia and resolve some of the issues on what labs you might use, how you go about it, and then trial some of the floating sensors and gear from RMIT in the eastern states in Western Australia. The transformational grant also helped us to start to train staff and build the capacity within the research in Western Australia. Some of the challenges was that it was only monitored over 1 year, so in science 1 year of data doesn't give us enough to make strong management decisions. And also in that year it was very, very dry and the water levels dropped a lot, so we had a lot of challenges with poor water quality, sensor fouling, but it just highlights how much when you've got less water quantity, you've got quality issues, and the co-benefits of looking at some of these things to deal with both water quality and emissions. By monitoring both the sort of traditional dam and the fringing vegetation dam, we had some interesting findings. So to monitor it, we monitored dissolved methane in the water and also through the floating sensor. And one of the interesting things we found that often where the levels were high in the water, they weren't as high in the floating sensor. So we're not too sure whether that's a result of the measurements or the project, but it'd really be interesting to measure a lot more dams and figure that part out. The other key thing we found was that at the time there was no processing of dissolved methane samples in Western Australia. You had to send your samples east, but you can now get that done within WA. Emissions and water quality in dams is highly variable. If we've got 200,000 dams in the southwest of WA, then 2 dams is not enough to get a management action, but it really sets us up well to monitor a lot more farm dams. It was really about building the partnerships between the research group within Western Australia and then also Victoria. And so we brought those teams together, and that's actually led to a national scale project through the Ripple project coming about. It's also led us to understand where we can go to learn off each other and how better to make management actions. Really excited to keep building on any educational stuff around improving water quality because that's such a production gain for livestock. As a pilot project, the next steps for this work is to scale some of the science we did from 2 dams to a lot more because we know that there's spatially a lot of differences across dams. One of the other things that I think is really interesting to keep focusing on in Western Australia is the challenges of when you have less water quantity, you've got poor water quality, and it's not just methane emissions but good water quality for stock and for productivity and spray water as well. So I think it's that looking at the whole puzzle of the co-benefits of emissions, water quality and what we can do as management actions moving forward.